In this video, I'm going to show you how to create adjustments to a layer so that you can alter things about it like the color or the value. So when you're making adjustments, you always want to make sure that you know what layer you're working on. Right now, I'm working on a full image, and it's the image that I imported at the start, and so it's a smart object. I can rasterize it, and that will allow it to make the adjustments to the entire image, except it's going to change the pixels and make it more or less permanent. Or I can make the adjustments to the smart object, and it'll make the adjustments to it, but those adjustments can be turned on and off because you can't fully edit a smart object layer. So let's show that one off first, and then we'll do another design. So once you know what layer you want, you're going to come up to Image and the top bar, and then come down to Adjustments. There's a lot of different adjustments, and they each do something different. The best way to get familiar with them is to really experiment with them. For the most part, though, they're pretty straightforward. Brightness and contrast alters how bright or how dark it is, and contrast is the difference between things that have high contrast, so really dark darks and really light lights, and then dull bits in between. Levels and curves allows you to adjust the entire image in relationship to each other, and that'll change things. That'll change the colors and the values at the same time. Exposure is similar to brightness and contrast, where it changes how bright it is or how dark it is. Vibrance, hue and saturation, and color balance are all ways to edit the color and what color we're looking at, as well as how colorful it is or how not colorful it is. And that is high saturation or desaturation. You can play around with a whole lot of these different things, but we're going to start off with something simple. Let's play around with the hue and saturation. It'll bring up another window, and usually it'll allow us to see the changes that we're making. But if I change the hue again is color. So the overall color is going to shift and change as I play around with it. I can also adjust the saturation, which is how colorful it is or how little color there is in the scene. Actually, I kind of liked how it was with little color, but let's make it dramatic and kind of weird. And then I can adjust the lightness here, but we could also have adjusted the lightness in other areas. This does everything. We can play it with specific colors as well as set some presets or use those. Once I'm happy with it, I can press cancel or OK. Notice how in the layers palette, remember how I said a smart object can't fully be edited. So it added a smart filter attached to this, kind of as if it was its own group. And it has the hue or saturation. So I can play around with these and I can add more or less. And I can show all of these or I could hide these. Notice that if I click off the filter, it goes back to what it used to be, but I can also click on the visibility, just like how layers work. Now, I'll show you what it looks like with a rasterized one. With a rasterized one, I have this background that I edited out the person. Same thing, you'll come to Image, Adjustments. This time, I think I'm going to play with color balance. And I want to bump up the cyans in this. I want to bring up a little bit of the magenta, and I want to add a little bit more blue to give it this like kind of nighttime vibe. And I can adjust whether this is changing the midtones, the shadows, or the highlights. And in fact, I want to add a little bit more magenta to my shadows. Not that far, but there we go. I think that makes me happy. Notice in the layers palette, that's all there is. If I turn off visibility, it's only turning off the visibility of that layer. So know what you want to change, know how you want to change it, and if you want to edit things later, and that will make things a little bit more simple. Another thing to keep in mind is it isolates to a particular layer. So if I have one object that I want to change, or if I want to change all the objects, it's going to be a little bit tricky. I have to remember the settings that I put on them, or it can be helpful if I want something to feel kind of different. So on this figure, if I come to image adjustments, I think I'm going to change the hue and saturation first. I think I want this to feel kind of more like a yellow vibe. I have to play around with it to kind of find what works. Oh, we're getting closer. I like that one. I'm going to bring up the saturation, and I'm going to bring up the lightness. I want it this like kind of ghostly. Here we go. The reds, I think I'm going to change a little bit. Actually, that was kind of neat. So you can see that this only put my edits on that figure and not the background itself. So you have to think about what layer you're working on and whether that layer is rasterized or a smart object.